Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in every woman's life where silence becomes her greatest weapon. When you stop texting, when you stop calling, when you pull your energy back from a man who didn't know what to do with it, something powerful happens. The shift is seismic, and suddenly the game changes, not just for him, but for you. Because the second you remove your effort, his reaction reveals everything you needed to know. Was he invested in you or just in your attention? Did he see your heart, or was he addicted to the convenience of your consistency? This speech isn't about playing games, it's about reclaiming your worth. It's about recognizing that when you pause the chase, you position yourself as the prize. Men notice when a woman with value goes quiet, and how they respond, that's your truth. Not the sweet words, not the promises, not the maybes. The reaction tells you who they are. And more importantly, it shows you who you are when you stop giving your power away. Because the woman who doesn't beg for love is the woman who attracts it without even trying. A man's reaction is not always about you. It reveals his emotional maturity. And the moment you stop texting, calling, or pouring your energy into him, you don't just create distance, you create truth. Because it's easy to act interested when someone is showing up for you every day. It's easy to play along when you're the one initiating, checking in, making the effort, and carrying the emotional weight of the connection. But the second you take a step back, the mask comes off, the energy shifts, and suddenly you get to see who he really is without the version of him that was coasting on your consistency. Most women don't realize how much they've been performing in relationships until they stop, until they go quiet, until they say nothing at all and wait. And that silence is not punishment, it's a boundary. It's a moment where the man has the opportunity to rise or disappear, to step forward or fade away. And that reaction, that's not about your worth, it's about his readiness. It's about whether he was engaging from a place of genuine intention or just enjoying the emotional labor you kept giving away for free. This is where women start to confuse attention for effort and affection for investment. A man who enjoys your presence doesn't always want to build a future with you. A man who replies to your texts doesn't necessarily care about your heart. And a man who calls you baby, says he misses you, and tells you all the right things may still run the moment the energy isn't convenient anymore. That's why silence becomes such a powerful revealer. Because when you're no longer managing the relationship for two people, you see if there was ever a real partnership to begin with. And here's the part that hurts. Many women take a man's silence personally. They internalize it, they question themselves, they wonder what they did wrong, what they could have said better, how they could have been more perfect, more easygoing, more chill. But the truth is, it's not about how perfect you were. It's about how emotionally unavailable he is. It's about how he responds when you stop enabling the dynamic where he does less and you do more. His reaction to your absence speaks louder than anything he ever said in your presence. If he disappears, don't take it as rejection, take it as redirection. If he stays quiet, understand that silence can be a confession. If he gets angry or tries to guilt you, know that emotional immaturity often shows up as manipulation. And if he steps up, reaches out, and communicates with clarity, maybe, just maybe, he was waiting for space to realize what he could lose. But whatever the reaction is, it's information, it's data, and you have to be brave enough to face it. So many women are afraid of pulling back because they think they'll lose the connection. But here's the truth. If silence breaks it, it was never stable in the first place. If space causes the bond to unravel, it was stitched together with obligation and one-sided effort, not love. Real love doesn't crumble under space. Real love isn't threatened by your self-respect. Real love isn't threatened by your pause with clarity, not confusion. A man's emotional maturity will always reveal itself in how he handles discomfort, when things aren't on his terms, when the energy isn't flowing in his direction. When he has to try for once, that's when you see who he is. That's when the layers fall off and the real him shows up, or doesn't. And that's the moment you stop guessing, you stop wondering, you stop obsessing over texts and signals and vibes, because his actions or his inaction told you everything you needed to know. Don't confuse your silence with a test. You're not playing games. You're standing in your power. You're saying, I will no longer be the only one keeping this connection alive. You're stepping out of the cycle of proving yourself and stepping into the energy of choosing yourself. And that's terrifying for someone who was used to you always being there. The man who isn't ready for a real woman will feel deeply uncomfortable when she stops chasing. He may even try to flip the narrative. blame you, accuse you of being cold, distant, difficult, but don't fall for it. Don't shrink back into over-explaining. Let your silence speak. Let it echo. Because your value isn't measured by how much noise you can make in someone else's life. It's measured by how powerful your absence becomes when you stop showing up for people who only noticed you when they needed something. When you stop texting, calling, reaching out, and overgiving, you create space for reciprocity to either enter or for the truth to reveal that it never will. And either way you win, either way you get your clarity. A man who is emotionally mature will feel your absence and respond with intention. He won't just say he misses you. He'll show up. He'll communicate. He'll ask questions. He'll seek understanding. He'll step up, because real men don't crumble in the face of boundaries. They respect them. And even if the connection doesn't work out, you'll have gained something far greater than a relationship. You'll have reclaimed your voice, your time, your energy. You'll have broken the pattern of overextending yourself just to be chosen. And when you stop doing that, you create the space for the right person to find you. Someone who doesn't need to be convinced of your worth. Someone who doesn't need you to chase, beg, or explain. Someone who recognizes the gift of your presence the moment you walk into their life and never makes you question it again. And until that person arrives, you hold your silence like the sacred boundary it is. You trust that your peace is more powerful than any performance. And you remember this truth. When you stop texting and calling, a man's reaction doesn't define your value. It reveals his readiness. And that's the clarity you never knew you needed. Distance creates clarity, both for you and for him. There is something wildly powerful about choosing space over constant engagement. In a world where we're conditioned to believe that love has to look like constant checking in, constant presence, and constant conversation, choosing silence feels radical. But silence isn't rejection. It's reflection. And when you take that space, when you stop texting, stop calling, stop being the one who holds the emotional glue of the relationship together, you create the clearest lens possible. You start to see what's real, what's honest, what's consistent. You stop being distracted by the noise and start hearing the truth. Because here's what no one tells you. When you're always emotionally available, always pouring into someone else, always chasing connection, you drown out your own inner voice. You get so caught up in managing their reactions, their moods, their behaviors, that you stop listening to your own instincts. You stop asking yourself, is this connection even feeding me? And that's why distance is necessary. Not because you're trying to punish someone, but because you need time and space to come home to yourself. To feel what it's like when your worth isn't wrapped around someone else's inconsistency, to discover whether your peace increases or decreases when the line goes quiet. Distance isn't just for him to figure out how he feels about you. It's for you to figure out how you feel when you're not being breadcrumbed with just enough energy to keep you hoping. It's to assess the way your body responds to peace instead of performance, because often we mistake anxiety for love. We confuse emotional chaos with passion, and we stay in situations that drain us simply because we fear the emptiness that follows walking away. But it's in that emptiness, when we stop calling, stop texting, stop chasing, that we finally meet our truth. And while you're sitting in your silence, he's sitting in something too. He's either waking up to what he lost or realizing that he was never really invested, and either outcome gives you data. If he notices the distance and moves toward you with clarity, consistency, and intention, then you've created the conditions for an emotionally mature conversation. But if he gets quiet too, or starts playing games, or only comes back when he senses your energy slipping away, then you know it was never about connection, it was about control. His reaction becomes a window into his emotional depth, because a man who values you doesn't wait for silence to speak up. He doesn't let space go unanswered. Some people only know how to respond when something they were taking for granted gets taken away. That's when you find out whether your presence was truly appreciated or merely expected. If someone is used to you always being there, always texting first, always holding the space, then your pause feels like pressure, and pressure has a way of squeezing the truth out of people. If he was coasting on your consistency, that distance will shake him. It will either force him to rise or reveal that he never intended to. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes we keep chasing because we're afraid of what we'll see in the stillness. We're afraid that the relationship we've been pouring into isn't actually as mutual as we told ourselves it was. So we keep calling, we keep texting, we keep initiating, not because we're happy, but because the illusion of connection feels safer than the reality of rejection. but distance brings healing. Because distance doesn't lie. It shows you exactly where the other person stands, and it shows you exactly how you feel when you're no longer performing for love. When you step back, it's not just about him reacting, it's about you reclaiming your emotional clarity. You begin to remember what it feels like when your peace isn't being negotiated every time someone ghosts, pulls away, or acts hot and cold. You begin to see that you don't have to beg for consistency, that the love that's meant for you won't be confusing, that the man who's emotionally ready won't leave you guessing. You begin to realize that you've been accepting the bare minimum because you were afraid of being alone. And in that realization, something shifts. You stop fearing the space, you start embracing it. Distance gives you the power to observe without being reactive. It gives you the perspective to see if his patterns match his promises. It shows you whether he was only showing up because you made it easy for him. And when you're not texting, not calling, not checking in, you create room for your intuition to breathe, for your heart to heal, for your standards to rise. You start noticing how much energy you were investing in someone who never asked how you felt, how much time you gave to someone who never made plans, how often you broke your own boundaries just to keep the conversation going. The clarity you find in distance is not always comfortable, but it is always honest. You realize that the man who disappears when you stop initiating was never really with you in the first place. That the one who needs constant attention to stay engaged isn't emotionally grounded. That the one who's only interested when he's at risk of losing you isn't safe love, he's a game. And that awareness doesn't just shift your relationship, it shifts you. It shifts the way you view your role in love. It shifts the way you prioritize your energy. It shifts the way you define what's worth your time and what's just a distraction. Distance is a filter. It removes the noise. It separates the talkers from the doers. It draws a clear line between those who want you around and those who want to keep you around only when it's convenient. It shows you whether he's willing to meet you halfway or only when you're doing all the walking. And that right there is your power, because you no longer need words. You've got the evidence. And that evidence becomes your decision maker. So if you stop texting and calling and you're wondering what his silence means, let it speak, let it echo. Don't rush to fill the void with overthinking or overfunctioning. Give yourself the gift of space, because clarity doesn't scream, it whispers. And in the stillness, you will hear exactly what you need to know, not just about him, but about yourself. Emotional unavailability often hides behind charm, effort, and words that sound sweet but mean very little when not followed by action. And the moment you stop reaching out, the truth begins to unravel. It's in that space, when your consistent energy is no longer present to keep things running smoothly, that his real emotional capacity is revealed. Emotional maturity isn't just about how someone behaves when things are easy. It's about how they respond when you set a boundary, when you pull back to take care of your own heart, when you step into your self-worth and stop overextending to keep them engaged. A man who is emotionally unavailable will often be triggered by silence. Not because he misses you in a genuine way, but because he's addicted to the attention, the validation, the emotional supply you provided. He's used to you making it easy. He's used to you being the one to chase, fix, reach, and repair. When that stops, his ego feels it before his heart does. He may act like he's confused or hurt, but what he's really feeling is a disruption to the dynamic where you were the one doing all the emotional labor. And that disruption is not an invitation for him to grow. It's often a trigger for him to react. Reactions from an emotionally unavailable man will usually fall into a few categories. He might withdraw completely, going silent in return, not because he respects your space, but because he doesn't know how to hold space for emotional depth. Or he might become reactive, texting you aggressively, accusing you of pulling away, trying to manipulate the narrative by saying things like, "I guess you never cared," or "you're acting different." These aren't reflections of his feelings for you, they're projections of his discomfort with your boundaries. Emotional immaturity shows up when someone makes your self-care feel like abandonment, when your pause feels like an attack instead of an act of clarity. And that's why space is such a powerful truth serum, because emotionally unavailable men don't rise in the face of distance, they retreat, deflect, or manipulate. They might suddenly say all the things you were dying to hear for months, but don't get it twisted, words spoken in panic are not the same as consistent behavior over time. A man who is emotionally available won't just say he cares, he'll show up when it counts. He'll communicate when it's uncomfortable, he won't need to be chased to show consistency. But a man who's unavailable, He'll do the emotional equivalent of throwing glitter over cracks, pretty words that cover broken foundations. It's hard to accept, especially when you've invested your heart, your time, and your hope into someone. But emotional unavailability doesn't change because you love someone harder. It doesn't transform because you stay longer. And it doesn't disappear because you sacrifice yourself to make them feel more secure. In fact, the more you overfunction, the more you enable the dysfunction, the more you chase, the more he runs. The more you communicate deeply, the more uncomfortable he gets, and then you're stuck in a cycle of proving your worth to someone who was never emotionally ready to receive it. But when you finally stop, when you put the phone down, when you stop sending the just checking in messages, when you stop trying to keep the connection alive with your energy alone, everything shifts. His silence becomes louder than his words. His inconsistency becomes undeniable. You stop rationalizing the distance, the mixed signals, the emotional hot and cold behavior, because now, without your constant effort covering up the cracks, the truth starts to speak louder. The relationship was one-sided, you were overgiving, and he was never emotionally in it the way you were. And in that realization, you don't just see him clearly, you see yourself. You see where your old patterns kicked in, where you started believing that if you were just enough, he'd change, where you lowered your standards to keep the connection, where you confused chemistry with compatibility, and in seeing it all, you begin to heal it. Because emotional unavailability in others often reflects the parts of ourselves that still fear being alone, that still crave validation, that still tie our worth to whether or not someone stays. But the moment you choose space over begging, clarity over confusion, self-worth over approval, you break the pattern. A man who is emotionally ready will never make you feel like your love is too much. He won't disappear when you need support, he won't punish you with silence, and he won't wait for you to stop chasing just to decide if he cares. He'll show up consistently, communicate openly, and honor the connection with his presence, not just his promises. Emotional maturity looks like accountability, like presence without pressure, like love that doesn't need constant performance to survive. And when you stop reaching out, if all you get back is silence or guilt trips, that's not love. It's a red flag wrapped in potential. The hardest part is that emotionally unavailable men often look the part. They can be charming, affectionate, even deeply connected during certain moments. And that's what keeps you hanging on, the potential, the glimpses of who they could be. But potential is a dangerous drug. It keeps you addicted to moments while ignoring patterns. And when you stop reaching out, when you take that step back, it forces you to look at the patterns you were too emotionally invested to see clearly before. If his reaction to your silence is to lash out, disappear, or send mixed messages, believe it. Believe that you stepping into your power made him uncomfortable because it disrupted the imbalance. And if he does come back, ask yourself, is he coming back to grow or just to regain control? Is he reaching out because he wants to meet you halfway or just to reset the old dynamic where you did all the work? Distance allows you to observe without rescuing, without fixing, without over-explaining. It allows you to stay grounded in your peace and watch how someone chooses to meet you or doesn't. And that's a lesson that will serve you far beyond this one relationship, because the more you grow, the more you'll attract people who match your emotional frequency, who don't need you to shrink so they feel bigger, who don't confuse silence with punishment but recognize it as a boundary, who don't play games with your heart because they value it too much. Your emotional availability is a gift. It's not something to throw at people hoping they'll finally see you. It's something to guard, to offer slowly, and to share with those who prove they can handle it. And the moment you stop texting, stop calling, stop chasing someone who has shown you with actions that they're not ready, you take your power back. You stop negotiating your standards. You stop watering dead plants. You start standing in the truth that real love doesn't need to be chased. It stands with you when you choose yourself. Silence creates a mirror. And when you stop texting and calling, that mirror reflects more than just the dynamic between you and him. It reflects what he sees in himself. When you are no longer available to distract him from his own emotional gaps, people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves. So when your voice, your love, your presence goes quiet, it's no longer about you being absent, it becomes about what your absence reveals. If a man has built his identity around receiving your love without ever having to reciprocate it fully, then your silence doesn't just feel like distance, it feels like exposure. Suddenly, there's no one to carry the emotional load, no one to validate his sense of worth, no one to soothe the insecurity he's been covering up with surface level charm. And that can be terrifying for him. Your silence calls out his lack of emotional responsibility. It reveals whether he was invested or just interested. It makes it clear whether he was emotionally committed or simply enjoying the benefits of your consistency. When you stop initiating, when you stop explaining, when you stop reaching, it shows you who is really holding the connection together. And that clarity is both painful and freeing. Because if a relationship crumbles in your silence, it wasn't built on emotional foundation, it was built on imbalance. And no amount of texting, calling, or showing up could have made it sustainable. The space you create when you pull back is not punishment, it's protection. It's sacred ground where you get to observe from a place of strength instead of survival. And in that space, you will see his real character. Will he respect your energy, or will he manipulate it to regain access? Will he rise to meet you, or will he spiral in passive-aggressive silence, hoping guilt will bring you back? These aren't just reactions, they're revelations. They show you what's behind the mask. And more importantly, they teach you how you respond when you're no longer in the cycle of over-functioning. Because pulling back is also a mirror for you. It reflects the parts of yourself that used to believe love had to be earned, chased, or fought for. It brings up the fears of rejection, abandonment, and not being good enough. That silence is uncomfortable because you're not just facing him, you're facing the version of yourself who used to accept crumbs and call it a feast. You're facing the part of you that tied your worth to how much someone needed you. And now you're detaching from that identity. You're rewriting the script. You're learning that love is not proven through pursuit, it's felt through mutual presence and effort. When you stop texting and calling, you disrupt a pattern, one where your value was measured by how much you gave and how little you received. You start creating space for someone to come to you, to show up without being prompted, to express without being asked, to contribute emotionally, not because you reminded them, but because they want to. This isn't about playing games. This is about reclaiming your energy. It's about giving someone the opportunity to take initiative so you can observe whether they were truly invested or just entertained by the version of love you provided on autopilot. The man who is meant for you won't need the silence to wake up. He'll already be showing up when things are mutual. But if he needs your absence to recognize your value, then the relationship was never emotionally aligned to begin with. And while it's tempting to respond when he finally texts, when he finally notices the shift, ask yourself this: is he reaching out because he misses you, or because he misses the comfort of your availability? There's a difference. One is rooted in emotional depth, the other is driven by ego and control. Pulling back from someone forces you to face your triggers, and it forces them to confront theirs. That's why this moment is more than just a pause. It's a reckoning, it's a reset. It's where you reclaim your standards. And the more uncomfortable it feels, the more you're growing. You are breaking the muscle memory of settling. You are retraining your heart to stop reaching for people who refuse to meet you halfway. You are reminding yourself that peace is more valuable than potential, and you are stepping out of the loop of codependency and into a mindset of emotional wholeness. You'll notice things that were once blurred by your desire to make it work. You'll remember how often you over-explained. You'll remember how many times you forgave silence, overlooked mixed signals, and ignored your intuition. And now you're finally honoring your own voice. You're choosing stillness over begging. You're choosing clarity over chaos. And in that stillness, you'll find strength. Because silence isn't weakness, it's power. It's a sacred boundary that says, I will no longer sacrifice myself to be heard by someone who never truly listened. And here's the truth: not every man deserves your softness. Not every man earns your persistence. Some only respond when the chase ends because they were never in it for the real connection. They were in it for the emotional benefits your availability provided. So when you stop showing up in all the ways they silently expected, they don't grieve the relationship, they grieve the convenience. They don't miss your soul, they miss the service. This is where your growth becomes non-negotiable, because when you stop reaching, you learn how to receive. You attract partners who lead with effort, not excuses, who call without being reminded, who communicate without needing space to figure out if they care, who don't disappear when you get strong but support your strength and meet you there. And this is what real love looks like. It's not built on anxiety, confusion, or emotional chasing. It's built on presence, on consistency, on mutual energy that doesn't require you to abandon yourself just to feel worthy. So let the silence speak, let the space reveal, let the man either rise or fall, but let yourself remain rooted in your truth, because this is not about teaching him a lesson, it's about embodying yours, it's about finally living like you know your worth. And in doing that, you send out a message to the universe that says, I no longer entertain what doesn't nourish me. That is the energy that creates transformation. That is the vibration that attracts partners, opportunities, and experiences that are aligned with your highest self. And that is the beginning of real love, with yourself first, and then with someone who sees it, respects it, and shows up for it. Healing isn't just about forgetting them, it's about finding you again. When you stop texting and calling a man, you're not just choosing silence with him. You're choosing to reconnect with the version of yourself that existed before you started trying to prove your worth. You're choosing to rebuild the relationship that matters most, the one you have with yourself. And in that space where his voice fades out and your intuition gets louder, you begin to hear what you had silenced for so long, your needs, your dreams, your standards. The moment you stop reaching out to him is the moment you start reaching into you, pulling out all the buried truths that were once compromised just to keep someone else comfortable. You begin to notice how much of your time and energy was spent managing the emotional weight of someone else's indecisiveness. How many days you spent wondering what you did wrong instead of realizing he wasn't doing enough. How many nights you replayed the silence, the half-hearted responses, the I'm busy, the I'll call you later, and you turned them into excuses instead of red flags. But now you're done romanticizing neglect. You're done calling inconsistency complicated love. You're done hoping for bare minimum to eventually transform into effort. Because now you know that love isn't built in confusion. Real connection doesn't require constant chasing. And your heart isn't some project for someone to figure out when it's convenient for them. This healing begins with radical honesty. You begin to admit where you are choosing hope over reality. You acknowledge the ways you are shrinking to fit into someone else's emotional comfort zone. You start owning your part, not to blame yourself, but to free yourself. Because when you take accountability for where you settled, you also reclaim the power to raise the bar. You stop seeing your silence as a punishment for him and start honoring it as a declaration for you. It's a line in the sand that says, this is where I stop betraying myself. And in that truth, you no longer crave his response, you crave your peace. Healing also looks like grieving what never was. Not just grieving the man, but grieving the version of love you created in your mind, the fantasy, the potential, the future you thought you were building. Because part of your pain isn't about what he did, it's about what you imagined he would do, what you hoped he would become. And when you stop texting and calling, that fantasy dissolves. You see the reality. And it hurts because letting go of hope can feel like letting go of the dream. But that space is what makes room for something real, something grounded, something mutual. In this space, you also start remembering what joy feels like without the emotional roller coaster. You begin to feel peace in the stillness instead of anxiety in the waiting. You start reconnecting with the things you abandoned while you were wrapped in his world, your passions, your self-care, your creativity, the parts of you that were dulled down in the process of trying to be chill or understanding or low management just to keep things light. Now you're no longer interested in shrinking, you're interested in shining. And that glow up isn't just aesthetic, it's internal, it's rooted in alignment, in presence, in self-trust. You stop blaming yourself for his silence. You stop thinking that if you had just texted differently, looked different, acted less emotional, he would have stayed. You finally understand that you could have been the perfect woman and he still would have fallen short, not because you weren't enough, but because he wasn't ready for enough. That's a breakthrough that changes your relationships forever. Because once you stop personalizing someone else's emotional unavailability, you stop chasing people who need fixing, saving, or convincing, you stop tying your value to how many chances you gave, you stop identifying love with struggle, and you start moving with the knowing that real love doesn't need to be chased, it just meets you. Your healing will challenge everything you once believed about connection. It will ask you to let go of narratives that told you love is sacrifice, that you should be grateful for any attention you get, that boundaries are selfish, or that needing more is being too much. You'll face all the versions of you that learn to settle, that learn to stay quiet, that learn to give until it hurt. And you'll hug her, you'll hold her, but you won't let her lead anymore, because now you've met the version of you who knows better, who sees clearly, who loves herself too much to keep repeating patterns that only offer pain disguised as passion. And this healing isn't linear. Some days you'll miss him. You'll hear a song, you'll scroll past an old picture, you'll get a flash of the good moments, and for a second you'll question if you made the right choice. That's okay, that's human. But don't confuse missing someone with needing them back. Don't let nostalgia rewrite history. Remind yourself of the full picture. The late replies, the emotional detachment, the moments you felt invisible. You didn't leave because of one bad day. You chose yourself after enough of them. And that decision wasn't made in bitterness. It was born in clarity. With time, you'll start attracting differently, because healing doesn't just change what you tolerate, it changes what you attract. When you stop calling and texting men who can't show up, you create space for ones who will. You'll notice the energy shifts. You'll see the difference in men who pursue you with purpose versus those who reach out because they're bored, lonely, or looking for control. You'll learn to spot emotional immaturity quickly, and instead of trying to decode mixed signals, you'll simply say no thank you. Because healed women don't waste time translating inconsistency, they just move on. And one day, when your healing is rooted, you won't even feel the urge to text or call someone who doesn't match your energy. You won't be tempted to explain your worth, justify your silence, or revisit something that drained you. Not because you're cold, but because you're clear. Because you now understand that love is a two-way exchange. And if someone isn't meeting you halfway, they're not meant to go the full distance with you. This is your power. This is your rebirth. The silence that once felt scary has become sacred. The stillness that once triggered anxiety now gives you peace. You no longer need external validation to feel valuable. You've met yourself. You've come home. And from this place, you don't just choose different. You attract different. You build differently. You love differently. Because now you know that the most powerful thing you can do when someone can't show up for you is to show up for yourself.